Hello. Thank you for joining me again. I am continuing the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. And this is by Jon Peniel. We are on chapter 13, part 3 on page 204 at the part of Signs of a True Teacher. Thank you to all that have subscribed. Welcome to all the new subscribers and those that haven't. Now is a good time and everybody can push the like button. So let's get started, okay? Signs of a True Teacher. After Zayn explained the things people should be aware of, he went on about what they should look for in a true teacher. Are you still getting all this written down? Yes, good. Like I just said, a true teacher is probably the first person anyone has ever met that really loves them. A regular person, selfish, separate self, whose separate self is in control, is basically like a drain, an attention or energy vampire, a black hole, which is like the opposite polarity of a star or sun. It is always really just looking to take, just concerned with what it can get. When the separate self is in control, a person still has a love life, may have had many love relationships, and may be in love, but they don't even really know what love is. They have never really experienced it. What they have experienced is someone stroking their ego at times, giving them pleasure at times, giving them, their separate self, attention at times. They love this, so they develop possessive attachments to these pieces of property that they call lovers or spouse. But a person with universal consciousness, a true teacher, is like a sun, always giving, always shining to everyone in every direction all the time. So again, as I said, it will likely be the first person someone ever experiences real love from. And this is very necessary for a student to experience. There is an ancient saying, it takes a candle to light a candle. Yes, I read that in one of the old teachings. I understand it, I think. It clearly relates to enlightenment, but I take it you are also relating it to unselfish love. Certainly. If you have never experienced true love, if you have never really been loved, how can you know what love is? How can you be loving, give love, when you don't even know what true love feels like on the receiving end or giving end? The teacher is a candle that gives you your first exposure to this light. Then, with your acceptance, lights you. Another way to identify your true teacher is to how his teachings affect you. If you have arrived at the place on your path in which you are ready for a teacher, you will have enough receptivity to your own inner voice that the teachings of a true teacher will resonate within you, so to speak. You will intuitively sense the truths he speaks. This is because your inner being, the part of you that is universal spirit, and the teacher's inner being are one in the same. As a seeker, a student, you are not very in touch with your own inner being. That's because of the smokescreen of thoughts and desires that your selfish, separate self has put between you and your own inner being. But the teacher is totally in touch with and manifesting his inner being. So when the teacher speaks, it is like feeling your own inner being and hearing the voice of your own inner voice. This reminds you of your true self and the truth you really know, but that you have just clouded over. It pierces your veil of separateness and rings your veil of inner truth. That's how I felt when I saw that broadcast. I knew it was what I was looking for, but I didn't know you were going to be my teacher. It was not time. All I knew at the time was that it was truth and what you were looking for. But when you find one whose actions and words ring an intuitive bell of truth within you, that is probably your true teacher, because there aren't many around. Getting back to the subject, Peniel, remember that it is important that if a person finds such a one who rings the bell of inner truth, that they should immediately do whatever they must to resolve any doubts they may harbor about the entity. Tell the people of the world this. When you have an opportunity, and if you have any doubts, talk to him about your doubts. The separate self may be creating doubts to keep you from finding your true teacher. Argue about your doubts if you want. Challenge the teacher's truths and methods. That is the time to do it, at the beginning of the relationship. For at the onset of finding your true teacher, doubts can also be helpful because they allow you to discriminate true teachers from false. But doubts that come after you have already worked through your initial doubts and dedicated yourself to having your true teacher in your life are a hindrance, because they create confusion and lack of love, where faith and trust should abide instead. These are doubts generated from the separate self to try and lead you away so it can retain control. When you are finally sure about your potential teacher, jump in with both feet. Don't look back and give the possessions your all. For this will be the opportunity for you to love someone more than yourself. Open up and surrender to the universal spirit, and let go of that which has been the cause of all the problems and pains from the beginning. Separation from God, selfishness. Author's note: spiritual growth via love and devotion to an enlightened teacher has been called bhakti yoga in some of the Indian/yogic traditions. And you find this said in the I Ching, Willem/Bain's translation. The supreme revelation of God appears in prophets and holy men. To vernate them is true vernation of God. This will, the will of God has revealed through them, should be accepted in humility. This brings inner enlightenment and true understanding of the world, and this leads to great good fortune and success. Just so that it's not misunderstood, I should point out again that a true teacher does not want worship, blind obedience, followers, etc. He is simply a loving, undistorted mirror that shows you both your inner true being and your illusions of selfish separateness. The teacher just wants to be of help in your process of growth, one that you choose. He wants to get over with it as quickly as possible, with as little hassle as possible, get you to enlightenment and on your way. If someone wants you to do whatever they say or believe whatever they say because they are God manifested on earth or whatever, watch out. When a true teacher wants you to do something or realize something, they want you to do it only if it is right and true, not just because they say so. Learning from a true teacher. Listen to a teacher to hear yourself. Because you are just beginning to listen to your inner voice, your selfish, separate self still has a lot of control and tries to confuse you with many different and conflicting voices/thoughts in an effort to influence you and throw you off track. You must learn to listen only to the inner being, and remember, it is a still, silent voice. A word of warning. If you are actually hearing voices telling you things, they are not. They are not your inner voice, and listening to them could be very harmful. Zion went on to explain how a teacher helps you to learn to hear your silent inner voice. Learning to listen to your inner voice is one of the areas where a teacher serves you. The separate self is always throwing around thoughts and to maintain its existence. If you really still the mind and separate self ceases to exist. So it doesn't want to be stilled. Remember, giving up its role as master and becoming servant to the spirit represents death to the separate self. And it's going to fight like hell to stay alive, using trickery, severe emotional pain, everything at its disposal. The separate self is a very, very clever little devil. And while it would prefer to keep your mind filled with selfish thoughts, if that is not possible, any thought is more desirable than its demise. Even painful thoughts, depressing thoughts, seemingly spiritual thoughts, or whatever. So keep the monkey mind cranking out all kinds of thought voices. These voices consistently chatter, grabbing your attention. The constant chatter overwhelms the still, silent inner voice. All these thoughts are like a mental noise that drown out the silent truth, which is presented by the inner voice. A teacher clearly mirrors your inner voice, giving you a course to make your way through that sea of mental thought voices of deception and illusion. This both teaches you to be in tune with your inner voice and also provide you with a means to know what your inner voice is saying in the meantime, while you learn to do it yourself. So once you can hear your inner voice, you are all set. Not exactly. There is a bit more to it. The selfish separate self can even use information received from your inner voice to help trick you. If you aren't certain or totally clear about your inner voice, you may not know this is even happening, since your teacher is like an external manifestation of your own inner being and speaks of that inner voice of truth. One of his functions is to reaffirm or confirm what your inner voice is telling you. This helps you through those times of indecision when the separate self-generated mind chatter obscures or makes it difficult to clearly hear the inner voice of truth, or yourself is using it to trick you. So when you hear some truth from your inner being and your separate self picks up on it, twists it around and rationalizes it away behind a wall of lies, your manifested inner being mirror of truth, the teacher, cuts right through the trickery, illusions, and blocks, reinforces the truth, and sends you on your way up the path, precisely, doing your part. Having a teacher is not going to do you any good unless you are receptive to him and you really want to change. You yourself must develop an attitude of humility, openness, receptivity towards the inner being, universal spirit, in order to hear your inner voice. Follow your inner voice, find your natural balance, and take your place in the universal order. One more time. The fundamental precepts of the children's teaching is that all inner beings are one. The balance, attitude, or relationship that exists between you and your inner being is the same relationship that you have with your teacher. Again, this is important to get. The true teacher is nothing more or less than your inner being clearly manifested before you through another person, a person who is clearly manifesting his own inner being. A person's reaction to or attitude towards a true teacher is dependent on the relationship they have with their own inner being. If it is a good relationship, if they like their inner being, they will like a true teacher. If they are intentionally blocked and closed down to their own inner love, they will be uncomfortable, fear, dislike, or hate a true teacher to various degrees depending on the severity of their blocks. Not only is it necessary to make sure you have the right attitude towards your inner being and teacher, but you must be prepared to work hard, and persevere. You need to die hard, attitude of never give up, and a positive attitude towards accomplishing your goal. Trying to do it will not work. Trying builds in failure by the very concept of the word. Either do or do not. Ultimately, everyone simply does what they want. And if you want to do it, you will. If you don't, you won't. A great skill to have along the way is of the ability to make the things you must do into the things you want to do. Beginning with your teacher, my personal experience. Many feelings other than an introvert's ego fears like I had come to a student when they start working with their teacher. After all, you have met someone who really loves you, knows you better than yourself, and is one with God. For one thing, I felt happy, safe, and carefree, like a very small child again. Only in the good ways. I recaptured the feelings I had when I was so young that I believed that everything was okay, that my parents were like God because they could take care of anything and kept me safe and secure. The feeling of total security was incredible. I had completely forgotten this feeling. It was buried underneath the walls of trauma that were built during growing up. It felt wonderful to not only remember and recapture the light-hearted, secure feelings, but to discover a new level of it, one that would never leave me. I cried in remorse, relief, and happiness. These new/old feelings came to me, not just because of my teacher, but because of my exposure to him made me realize that the universal spirit really was in charge of everything and would take care of its children who came back into the fold, and that this was for real, not an illusion like the security I felt with my parents. Zayn then felt more like a father to me. A kind, loving, big, powerful Father Supreme. It really made sense why I felt like calling him Father, and did. It felt that was both in the personal sense and in the representation of Father aspect of the God sense. In fact, this is where the use of the term entered into Catholicism and a few other religions. There are many other feelings that may be associated with working with your teacher. Some people will feel pain as the teacher's presence reveals old wounds, childhood traumas, etc. These can come to the surface and come to light. Then they can be healed. My initial feelings upon first meeting Zayn were not so lofty and serene. However, finding your true teacher can also be a frightening experience, depending on your ego. For me, it was both a wonderful experience and frightening, and at the same time, it was an incredible, happy surprise, because until I found him, I was in deep despair. I could not seem to reach my greatest goal, a path with real, solid, consistent truth, and finding other people who were living it. And then one day I heard a man speak. Those words rang my inner bell of truth, and it eventually turned out to be my teacher. But hearing him speak also frightened me, because when I first met him, I was an introvert with a very big ego to protect. While Boisterous, extroverted people are often looked at as being egotistically. It is generally the introverts, also sometimes called shy, or the quiet ones, that are even worse and often have the biggest egos and greatest lack of humility. They are introverts by design. They create a shy shell to hide themselves from other people so that none of their faults would be seen or confronted. Teachers actually prefer to work with extroverts, jerks, rather than nice, seemingly gentle and sweet introverts, because extroverts are more upfront about their thoughts and feelings, which facilitates the teacher/student's process. I had a huge ego and was a big introvert. The process that a student undergoes with a teacher is something like an exorcism. A teacher needs to have a student that exposes the aspects of his or her selfishness and negative programming in order to eradicate them. For a teacher to do his job having a student that speaks their mind, even when it is asinine, is far superior to having an introverted student that hides his thoughts both from himself and others. An extrovert who also has a humble attitude is the best combination for learning quickly, not quite as rare as a cruise ship in Arizona. Anyway, let's get back in time again to when I had not really recognized or acknowledged that Zayn was my personal true teacher yet. I was still avoiding it, wondering where I would find my teacher. I was a radical introvert, so I tried to avoid the intense Zayn and avoid the confrontations, exposures, and lacks on my selfish separate self's ego that I knew would be inevitable if I exposed myself. I avoided asking questions or even being seen. It was the sitting in the back of the classroom syndrome in the extreme, more like staying away from the classroom entirely if possible. But it was ultimately unavoidable, and the inevitable attacks on my ego were forthcoming just as I feared. I may have mentioned this earlier, but one day Anastasia invited me to join her and do the star exercise technique with a large group of elder and novice monks in Zayn. The exercise was being done outside with he and about 100 monks. Zayn led the exercise. We were holding hands, forming a giant circle. During and after the exercise, I was seeing vibrating energy everywhere. Even though I was afraid of him and he was virtually surrounded by a swarm of novice and elder monks, which made it even more intimidating to my introverted psyche, I had wanted to break the ice and talk to him, so I figured this would be the right time because I finally had something profound and spiritual to bring up, to impress him with, and I assumed he and everyone else would be rightfully impressed with my spiritual proudness and observations. Finally, I made my first direct statement to him, asked my first question, and was dealt the ego-devastating truth. Zayn, I was seeing the energy everywhere when we were doing the star exercise. He snapped. Not really, but it felt like it. It's only phenomenon. Don't pay any attention to it. Ouch, my ego. He was in the middle of another conversation that I had interjected my ill-timed, timid statement into. Here I thought I'd finally found something safe and profound to say, something impressive. Boy, did he have a pen for my bubbles. I didn't realize it at the time, but his response was dedicated to my way of being most of the time. Introverted, contrived, and egotistical. That's what really came across when I made the remark. And his response was to that, dealing with that and trying to get a rise out of me more than it was an actual answer to the question or statement I was making. Even though his answer was true, was accurate, it could have gone many different ways had I been different. Trickery stuff. Teacher/student exorcism process. When I got past the ego fears enough to wake up and smell the tea, I saw what I had already sensed and feared, rather what my selfish, separate self was afraid of. I couldn't get away with anything with this man. He knew me better than I knew myself. He was my personal true teacher. Sometime later, with my tail between my legs, I meekly asked him to be my teacher, and it began. Handing me a line of bull was not only useless, but would arouse a more intense response. The more I defended myself, the more intense he would become. When I tried to get away with lying or resisting the truth, his intensity to my blocks would result in him yelling at me, not with normal anger, but like the wrath of nature abused. The vibration of his booming voice struck to the core of my solar plex. Sometimes he would yell when he wasn't getting on my case about anything, just yelling for the hell of it, about whatever, maybe not even related to me, but he did it just to shake me up and see if some ego buttons to push/ego sore spots, etc. would pop up to work with. When I got past trying to get away with anything, and when his intensity no longer had an effect on me, our relationship turned very warm and close. I remember that last time he ever yelled at me, just like it was this morning. I didn't have my usual ego reaction, which he noticed immediately. He looked me in the eye and said, "That's not going to work on you anymore." I shook my head. Nope. He broke out in the biggest, pleased as punch grin I'd ever seen. My learning required no more shaking up, yelling tactics from then on. Thus included none. The closest relationship. Your teacher is the most important relationship you will ever have. For one, because of who he is, your inner being manifested, and what he will do for you. But your teacher also becomes your best friend. Actually, far more than your best friend. He is someone who loves you, and who you may love more than anything before. The true teacher even becomes a lifeline that you cling to in your darkest hours when your separate self is going through its death pangs. But the teacher-student relationship is not all sweetness and light. There is the painfully hard work ahead of demolishing the walls of your separate self has built. Let the testing begin. When you decide you want to change and you make the decision to go for it, to set foot on the path and devote your life to the universal spirit, things start changing fast in one way or another. If you have essentially made an eternal commitment, it is as if you have said, "Okay, God, I'm ready to come back. I'm ready for anything I must do in order to change and serve as a vehicle for you." And so the first step of your cross-bearing path to the crucifixion begins. An intense flow of heavy tests hit you. Trials of pain, suffering, and temptation come one after another from all directions and sources in your life, sometimes many at one time. Again, remember the ancient text, God falls hardest on those he wants most. An old lover who you once wanted to marry may call you up out of the blue after 10 years, and they're rich and they want to marry you. Your father may die, your mother is sick and needs you to tend her night and day, and your brother is worthless for such things. You get the best job offer in your life, but it would mean moving away from where your path lies. Your grown child desperately needs your help for some non-spiritual reason, yet it is a worldly, valid, or normally important reason, something that you would be obligated to do ordinarily. You name it, it will come out of the woodwork to lead you away from your true spiritual path. You will only be able to pass by such diversionary life experiences without falling by the wayside of your path into a diversionary trap. If, number one, your consciousness is expansive enough to see the bigger picture, to see the greatest good for all people that you can do with your life if you stay on your path. And two, you have the conviction to follow your path, regardless of the things that try to lead you off. Then there is the pain of following your real path that comes up. Zayn reminded me once, the path is like a bed of roses, flowers, thorns, but if one walks in the footsteps of those that have walked there before, the masters/teachers, then one can avoid the pitfalls of thorns and the flowers. Your teacher is also a bed of roses and thorns and all. The true teacher is also part of the intense flow of tests you go through. He draws out the things that keep you from loving unselfishly, the negative manifestations and programming of the selfish separate self. And then he reflects back to you. If you are open to this reflection of yourself and use it to change, it is a mild event and will even be pleasant if you are humble and really desiring to see the truth about yourself. But if you are blocked, if you lack humility and resist seeing the truth, the universal spirit will present the facts more intensely through teacher's inner being to your inner being. The degree of intensity increases in direction proportions to the degree of resistance. And if you continue to be blocked to that, God will teach you in even more intense ways through life itself, the school of hard knocks. This is much like the way a lightning strike works. Lightning is created when electricity of one polarity seeks out its opposite polarity to find neutralization. If something blocks its path or resist as it tries to flow through to its ground polarity, then it will intensely blow its way through. But lightning will not explode things in its path that do not resist its flow. Dealing with the universal spirit within a teacher is similar. When the teacher/student's process of exorcism is happening, it is like that lightning. If there are things in the student that block the flow of truth from the universal spirit, it will intensely strike like lightning at the negative blocks. But if the student is being open and not resisting the truth, the teacher is reflecting, the spirit finds no blocks, the electricity passes through with little or no trauma, or actually becomes an ecstatic experience. So, when something is presented to a person that requires a change, they can fight it and things will get intense, or if they let go Open up and love unselfishly, a neutralization will take place. The neutralization of negative coming into contact with positive. The neutralization of light coming into contact with darkness. This is the process of true exorcism that the teacher performs. This can only take place if a person allows it, however. After all, everyone has free will. A person should want it more than anything, and the more they want it, the faster and easier the work with a teacher will be. But in any case, a person must let go and let the process happen. And they must work at giving in their thoughts, words, and actions. Let go and let God. Zayn knew my fears and desires, and when we began the process of freeing me of them, this became painfully evident. For instance, he didn't know it, but I hated washing dishes more than anything. My mother made me do it as a child, and I developed a major repulsion and issue over it. On the other hand, I loved playing music. I began playing when I was 5, and I had a gift for it. And as I said in the chapter on subconscious programming, I knew it could affect the larger numbers of people. So I had hoped that one day I would do that as my profession. But Zayn seemed to have a pen for every one of my separate self's bubbles. During my first personal private conversation with Zayn, I intended to tell him my desires regarding helping people through music, and I did. But the problem was, while everything I was saying about music was true, it also was a personal desire. The cancer of my selfish separate self was infecting my abilities and affecting with my goals. Not to mention creating a huge stumbling block in my personal growth. I met with him in a little tent that was a setup just outside the monastery walls, where he was meeting and ministering to the householders who lived there. Zayn, I wanted to talk to you about my life and what I will be doing. Interesting timing. I wanted to talk to you about the same thing. I explained all about my ideas for helping the world with music, what I knew and what I could do. Then the biggest hammer in the world fell on my head. If I were you, I'd forget about music. Forget about the guitar. You will never play one again. We don't even have one here. But we do need a dishwasher for the monastery. And considering what you need, that would be the best work for you for the rest of your life. Instant ego shock. I was floored, stunned, dying. I didn't know what to say. I respectfully and foolishly argued initially and intensely. But Zayn, I've realized that the forces of light work through music, and I have a great talent for this. I have written songs that are positive and uplifting, both lyrically and musically. And some of the lyrics I know were channeled by the hierarchy, because I didn't even know what I was writing or what the things meant at the time. And now I do. I really think this is at least part of my destiny. No, I don't think so. I think you will learn and serve God better through washing dishes. This is your destiny as we have seen it. Of course, I didn't have to do these things. I wasn't forced to, but if I didn't, I couldn't stay in the monastery. And being there and learning and growing spiritually was something I had wanted so much for so many years. Besides, I knew about tests, and at first I figured that my conviction was just being tested. I knew this was standard procedure. Then the dishwashing started, At first, I had just counted on it being a temporary test, so it wasn't too horrible, but soon it became a great struggle. I hated doing the dishes and thus did a poor job, a little bit consciously and a little bit subconsciously. My bad attitude made me a lousy dishwasher. I was slow, and because of this, dishes from one meal would not be ready for the next. Many dishes accidentally broke. Some were left dirty and soapy, making others sick occasionally. After a month of this, I started wondering if maybe it wasn't a test. Maybe it was for real. After 3 months, I was seriously doubting it was a test, and I was debating with myself if I really wanted to stay and do this forever. My self-centered preoccupation with being miserable while washing dishes overwhelmed the better parts of my life. I lost touch with all the wonderful things there, the good life I actually had, and the positive realities of the rest of the life I was leading during the times when I wasn't washing dishes. But even though my separate self tortured me and filled me with negative thoughts, I kept reminding myself and remembering why I was really there, over and over again. I mustered my willpower and conviction, and finally, really truly dedicated to stay with total conviction, even if dishwashing was going to be my job for the rest of my life. As soon as I made that real internal choice, the one that was to me an irreversible commitment, the great heavy burden I was suffering with, lifted from me instantly. I felt happy again. I changed my attitude, and with it my approach to doing dishes. I turned my dishwashing into a flow meditation like Tai Chi or a martial art kata. Remember earlier I said it is great to have the ability to make the things you must do into the things you want to do? I first applied this here. Dishwashing suddenly became so different from the way I had previously experienced it. It was unbelievable. And now the dishes were cleaned on time, spotless, and none were being broken. At the end of the very day I made this internal change, Zayn came into the kitchen, which he rarely did ordinarily. "I'm afraid I have bad news for you." "What is it?" I said worriedly. "You are needed elsewhere, and I will need to give up your duties, and will need to give up your duties as dishwasher. I know it will be a great sacrifice." I thought to myself, smart ass, in a nice way. "Why?" I asked calmly. "You need to train more in the making of music and the other arts. It had been determined that some of your destiny lies in these areas. You will not have time now for all three, doing the dishes, your regular spiritual training, and that special training in music, visual art, and writing. So the dishwashing must be sacrificed." Again, I thought to myself, smart ass. The funny thing was, it didn't really matter much anymore. I wasn't even excited or feeling joyous about it. I was already joyous from letting go and rediscovering something far more real and important. And I now knew that whatever I was physically doing was not as important as my consciousness during my doing of it. In fact, I discovered that my consciousness was the most important thing in my doing of anything and everything. But nevertheless, I received many instruments, including guitars, that they did have there. And wouldn't you know it, when I played again, I could play 10 times better than before. And I couldn't understand why at the time. It didn't make sense. Since I hadn't played in so long, I asked Zayn about it the next day. Zayn, why is my instrument playing so much better and easier than it was before? Because you are beginning to let go and let the universal spirit do it through you instead. But there were new ego blows to come. Next, playing music, which used to be just a pleasurable experience for me, became the very center of my ego target. My music training was very hard and involved letting go of everything I thought music had to adhere to and everything I thought music was. All I had previously learned was being stomped on and torn apart. Scales, notes, styles, methods, they were all broken down. I was required to play drills and scales that made no sense. It was killing my musical sensibilities, preconceptions, and ego. But years later, by the time I was through with music hell, I had learned total freedom of expression and letting my higher self come through to play for me. It resulted in music that could never have been done by me before because of the box of standards I was trained in. Now I could express anything that came to me and came through me. Emotions, feelings, inspiration, and visions could be created in the mind of a listener that I could have never done on my own. Years later, I would actually have a great influence behind the scenes on the music business and music that would be made for the masses by the sum of the most popular music stars in the world. Hitting hard times. As I went through my transformation and growth at the monastery, I often found it painful and hard. I asked Zayn about my trials and why it was so hard to change and grow sometimes, even when the changes seemed simple, and why I would feel angry with him, even though I wanted him to help me, and that's all he wanted to do. Once a person begins the process of self-exorcism with their teacher, they come upon their blocks. And if they don't transcend their blocks easily by themselves, then they'll get hit by the lightning, so to speak. And because this process is unrelenting, the student may sometimes feel like their teacher picks on them, busts them, etc. But it's just one of the separate self's reactions to having the squeeze put on it. The light of truth, dispelling its illusions, blocks, and deceptions. But sometimes it's so hard, I have actually thought about leaving at times. Waves of growing pain come as the separate self uses thought and emotions in an attempt to confuse and mislead the student. The separate self will rationalize and defend itself. But fortunately, it is useless to defend yourself against your teacher because he is your own inner being and he knows the truth. This leads the separate self to an unavoidable conclusion. Get away from the teacher. A student may start thinking of all kinds of reasons why they should escape from the presence of their teacher. Seemingly good reasons too, at least for the rationalizations. Sounds mighty convincing to the battered, self-gratification starved separate self. In extreme cases, they start thinking there is something wrong with their teacher. If this ever happens to you, go over this little checklist. Are you feeling love? Are you loving selflessly? Or are you feeling sorry for yourself, angry, negative, or into yourself? Always remember that if you're not feeling love, no matter what the circumstances, then you are not seeing clearly and you are causing the problem. You are blocking the love because of some allegedly good reason which cannot really exist. Let go, give up, understand. Nothing, no reason is good enough to stop loving in any circumstance. Not loving unselfishly can only make things worse. But sometimes it almost feels like physical pain too. It gets so bad. There is nothing you can do but endure it and go through it. Personal growth is often like a physical healing crisis. By enduring the suffering, fever, vomiting, etc., you can, with patience, understand humility and perseverance, know who you really are as your inner being emerges from the debris. The soul/inner being is externally indestructible. When there is nothing left, there is the soul, there is the spirit, there is your true self. You just need enough love for your teacher to hang on by a thread. Hang in there until it is over. The lasting rewards are far, far greater than the sacrifices and pain. That's the end of chapter 13. We've made it to chapter 14 on page 214. This has been the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. Thank you very much for listening to me read. Thank you very much for subscribing. Thank you very much for hitting that like button. Thank you very much for returning to listen to me read again. So until then, have the most benevolent day.